guys, this is Daniella.
Hi guys, it's Marwah.
We both study mechanical engineering. I'm class of 2022.
I'm the class of 2021.
And today we decided to give you a debrief of EWB.
This presentation is meant for our new members to help you get accustomed to EWB and feel more comfortable. Just so you know, all of the links throughout the slides are going to be clickable links for your reference in the future.
A quick rundown of what we are going to talk about. We will introduce what is EWB, who is in EWB, how communities join, and after they've joined, how they are paired with the chapters, what are the community and chapter responsibilities, talk about the project timeline, and finally, how our chapters here at Harvard works. But before we dive into the presentation, we want to talk about some common acronyms. So you will hear us talk about EWB, which is Engineers Without Borders. We will also talk about NGO, which is a nonprofit organization, also non-governmental organization. We'll talk about the CBO, which is the community-based organization, as well as Harvard Seas, which is the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences here.
Yes, and Harvard Seas is just the department that the Engineers Without Borders chapter at Harvard is associated with. So first let's look at what EWB-USA is and the goals of the community. EWB-USA is a national organization based in the United States. It's part of EWB as a whole, which can be international, and there are EWB Kenya or EWB for other countries. They all share a similar mission of improving the basic human life for people internationally, but EWB-USA compared to other international EWBs have slightly different approaches to this and slightly different rules. So EWB-USA is a nonprofit organization based in the United States. It's been around since 2002, and it partners EWB chapters with other communities to work on engineering projects that are based on water infrastructure to meet basic human needs. The types of projects that we usually work on are wells, water distribution, rainwater catchment, building, schoolhouses, etc. It's important to note that EWB is not a charity, so they work together with communities over usually the course of 5 years to build sustainable projects. And the point is to foster a sense of ownership from the community of the project. One of the ways we do this is to encourage community engagement and activity during the project construction process, and to have the communities pay a 5% contribution fee of the total construction costs. But the point is not to come into a community and to build something, but rather to work with the community to make them a sustainable, independent community.
Thank you, Marwa. And now we're going to talk about who is in EWB-USA. EWB-USA is formed of 3 different parts. So we have the university chapters, which comprise of the students who are volunteers like us who work a year long or so, depending on how long you want to work on each project, developing some design projects for those communities. But we also have professional chapters who permanently work with EWB and take on more complicated cases that need more expertise that our student can't do. And then we have the project engineers who are there to review some of the reports that we write and just to make sure that we've filled all the requirements and that we are ready to go to implement the projects. And then afterwards, we are going to talk about how the communities join EWB-USA. Obviously, some preliminary steps that they have to follow. First of all, they have to form a CBO, which is the community-based organization, as I talked about before. And basically, it's just a community of a group of people who represent the rest of the community. And then that CBO is in charge of filling out an application that we are going to introduce right after. And also, they have to form some community partners who usually can be like local drillers, companies, or local government companies, or in-country partners, just some people, who can help run the project when the group is there. So the application. But first of all, before even introducing the application, let's talk about how the communities learn about the EWB and the application itself. So it's usually done through the word of mouth or some NGOs or EWB in-country office if there is already an EWB established in that country. or FOMO and neighboring communities where EWB has worked before. So now finally, here is a picture of the community application. As you can see, there are just some easy questions that can be answered in 1 or 2 sentences. It's usually made in a sense that it has to be easy to understand for the communities to be able to respond quickly and kind of like explicitly without having that barrier of the language or anything. So some of the components of that application are the CBO contact information and NGO contact information, which is comprised of the historical background of the CBO, the structure, some of the roles and responsibilities as well. This is a picture of a CBO, and the picture was taken last year during the assessment trip that our chapter conducted in Kenya, Kibon, Kenya. There is also a section for local government contact and information, but that's only in the case that the government has already a partnership with the local government. If they don't, it's totally fine. And then there is also another section of logistical information where the community describes the number of households that they have, the local accommodation, safety hazards, and yes, and then after that, there is another section for the community challenges and vulnerability. They give more detailed explanation of the problem that the communities face. In this picture, we see a spring that has dried out, but unfortunately, this community depended on it in order to get their water access. And the spring initially had dried out due to different reasons. Climate change is one of them, but also the fact that the spring is seasonal, so it gets refurbished every time that there is rain and everything. But which makes it unreliable. And also on the side, we see a purifier packet just to also kind of indicate that this water has also some other sanitary issues. And finally, the community describes the type of infrastructure that they have already in their communities. But before we mention that, I also want to add on the fact that in the application there is a component for finances and land ownership, and in that part, that's where they talk about the type of land that exists there, if there is like open field or not, if the land is owned by them or other people, and also like what percentage of it is owned by like different other people, because we want to make sure as a chapter that the land is owned by the community and not other people. And then in the finances part, that's where they describe like the type of resources that they have, and also give more of a plan on how they are planning on uh, meeting the 5% contribution fee that they are expected to contribute. So back to the community infrastructure, we have some pictures that were taken. One in Kibon, and this is a manual water pump that they had already in their communities. And then this is another picture that was taken in Mukatani, Tanzania, of some water tanks that they had. So this is the type of things that they mentioned in their application. And then the second step is to form some community partners. So the CBO, as I said before, is a group of people from community to represent the people. And also they are responsible for coordinating with chapters. Then we have the in-country partners who are not part of the CBO or the community, but acts as a liaison between the chapters and the CBO. Usually it's the NGO, but in case of Kibon, since they didn't have one, it was another person called Paul, who was a Kenyan who had worked with EWB before. And then there are also some local government members that form partnership with the community. But if they don't have that type of partnership with the government, is that, again, as I mentioned before, they should just let us know, because it's not required. But ideally, also, in case the chapter is working on some water access project, if they already have a connection with local drilling companies, they should also mention that. And now we are going to talk about some potential obstacles, or like all the barriers and difficulties that the community may face as they apply. First of all, they might not have the information about EWB USA, or not even the information where to get the application form. Another one of the obstacles is the lack of technology literacy needed to submit the application online. So however much EWB USA has tried to make the questions as straightforward as possible, it's still kind of difficult for a non-native English speaker answered some of those questions, which are kind of technical in nature. So the language barrier is definitely one of the obstacles, and the technical terms as well. Another one of the obstacles is the fact that the community may be unable to form the CBOs or to pay the contribution fee. And then another problem is the fact that it's kind of hard to summarize all the problems that the community might have in such a short amount of time and space given allocated on the application.
So next we're going to be talking about after the entire process that Daniela has described of a community finding out about EWB, filling out an application, sometimes with the help of a NGO or another partner, but also sometimes alone, which can be very difficult. What happens to that application, and how does that application end up combining and having a chapter work with a community? So first of all, there is a website called Volunteer Village. This is the EWB website, and it has all the information. It is basically a database of the projects that EWB USA and all of its chapters are working on. So each chapter has a group, and its members are a part of it. So they have an account. And when the chapter is looking to start a new project or adopt a new project, is the more technical term, the chapter goes to Volunteer Village and goes into a specific link in Volunteer Village, which leads them to the unassigned ICP programs. So this link lists all of the projects that have not been assigned yet. As you can see here, there are some projects in Guatemala, some in Kenya, some in Malawi, some in Nicaragua, etc. So depending on the chapter and what they're looking for in the scope, whether, for example, it's a student chapter that is looking to work in a particular country or is looking for a smaller scope project, or if it's a professional chapter, which tend to work on much larger scale projects because they have more expertise, they can filter from here by country or by the type of project, if it's water, agriculture, sanitation, infrastructure, or any other criteria that they want to filter by. Most of the time for the Harvard chapter, I think we tend to filter by country. Since we are always working on 2 projects, we usually tend to have one in, I think usually we aim for South America and Africa. So after we have searched through these and narrowed down to a couple of options that are the type of project that we want, the country, etc., then we can start looking into some certain no-go or go criteria. So this depends on the chapter, what they're looking for, the scope, etc., as I mentioned. Most of the information the chapter will be getting to answer these questions is based on the application that the community submitted. That's how we get the initial idea of the community. And then afterwards, a lot of these questions are answered after doing the first visit trip, which is called the assessment trip to the community. So once you've looked at the application and spoken a little bit to the community and you get a sense of them, if it seems like a good community and a partnership that you want to pursue, you do an assessment trip. So you visit the community, and after that, that's when you make the final decision of whether to start a project and adopt a project with the community, in partnership with the community. So some of the no-go criteria, go/no-go criteria that is used to make this judgment is, again, partially answered from the community application and partially answered from the assessment trip. There are a couple of categories of thinking of these questions. First of all, the community and NGO capacity. Since this is a partnership and not a charity, we want to make sure that these projects are going to be sustainable by the community after the chapter leaves. So some of the questions that we look to ask is, will the NGO and the community be able to support the project enough for it to be successful? Was the community application fully honest about the water problems or infrastructural problems that they're facing and their ability to support the project? Now, it is very difficult, as Daniela mentioned, to communicate a lot of these difficulties that they're facing. So we're not talking about, small miscommunications, but we're talking about, larger. We want to also know, will the project be sustainable? Will the community be able to maintain it after the partnership is finished? Is the community leadership involved in the project? Now, this is mainly talking about the community-based organization, as Daniela described. The community-based organization is usually members from the community who are representing the community, and they're the ones who are responsible for communicating and coordinating with the chapter, with the EWB chapter, to make sure the project is in progress, to provide information, to do any tasks related to the project to help the project move along. And then, is there a change in project scope that makes it impossible for the chapter to fund the project? Some other things that we look at are technical feasibility. So, is the proposed project going to be technically possible with the resources available both by the community and local shops around the community and with the resources available to the team? This includes the skill sets that they have and the fundraising that they're able to do. Are the necessary materials and skilled labor accessible? Will the government allow the chapter to go through with this project? Now, this could be on both the US end or the end of the community, sometimes on the US end. Especially for college chapters, there might be some regulations about which countries we can visit. And on the community end, sometimes there are permits or other regulations about projects, especially if it's like a borehole or some infrastructure project. Another question we want to ask too is at the end of the assessment trip, which is the first trip that is done usually to collect data about the community, is there enough data collected to make informed design decisions? Does the chapter have the infrastructural and technical knowledge to construct the system that the community is looking for? And is the problem that the community has described, is it prevalent? So if it's a water related issue, such as the one that we were facing in Kibon, is the groundwater in Kibon of sufficient quality, or is there a need for a borehole to increase the quality of water? Some other questions that we have are related to impact. So, will the project have the impact predicted? One of the most important questions is this a project that the community members seem to want? We don't want to build a project or be involved in something that is not with the consent of the community and is not something that the community wants. The point of the whole project is that it is, again, once more, a partnership. So we want to make sure that whatever project we're building, whatever road or plan we're taking to achieve that, is in alliance with what the community wants. Is the NGO truly representing the best interests of the people? And are there any other organizations or projects currently addressing the same issue that we're planning on addressing? Finally, chapter safety. So we just want to make sure that participating in this chapter does not and never does cause any health or safety risks to the team. So this is just a summary of some of the go, no-go criteria of factors to take into consideration when choosing a project. Language barrier, country, travel restrictions, all of these things that we've discussed. And ultimately, once a chapter chooses a project and does an assessment trip, the partnership can officially begin. And that is the start of a 5-year partnership.
Okay, so now we are going to talk about some of the community and chapter responsibilities. But first, let's talk about the chapters. So some of the chapters responsibilities are, first of all, to listen to the community and design a sustainable solution to the needs that they express. So as we had mentioned before, the community is expected to pay 5% of the whole construction fees, but the chapter is, on the other hand, responsible of raising 95% of the rest of the cost, as well as 100% of all the other costs that we didn't mention. So create thorough pre-trip and post-trip report is also on one of the responsibilities of the chapter. The chapter is expected to communicate with the CBU and the community as soon as they make new changes to the project, just to be sure that the community is in agreement with whatever they are doing. So they have to stay honest and accurate and document everything that they are working on and that they are doing on the project as well. But one of the most important chapters responsibility can be summarized as prioritizing the community needs and well-being. So on the other hand, we have the community's responsibilities. So that's just like expressing the community voice strongly and work with the chapter to design sustainable and culturally appropriate solutions. So the community is expected, to contribute 5% of the construction cost, but also to be involved and offer a strong community voice as well. They have to keep communicating with the chapter about plans and needs as well. The CBO should represent the community at all times, and they also should help through the surveys and the construction. Also, it's important to mention that the community actually will be responsible of helping with the accommodations in terms of housing during the trips that the chapters will be conducting in those communities.
So next, I just want to introduce you guys to a great quote I found in one of EWB's documents explaining the project process. And it says that good planning, monitoring, and evaluation establishes clear links between past, present, and future initiatives and development results. Basically, the goal of this statement is just to say that there has to be developed a set of criteria that the community and the chapter can use before, during, and after the implementation of a project to monitor objectively the progress of the project and the impact that it's making, to be able to measure the program effectiveness, and so that we can grow next time and to improve on the project process that we adopt. So, in instance of a borehole, for instance, or a water-related project, if we're looking to improve water quality, one of the metrics that we could use is the number of visits to a health clinic for water-related illnesses, or the bacteria levels in the water sources that the community seems to use. If we monitor this before the project, during the project, and after the project, hopefully we can see that the number of visits to the clinic goes down, or the prevalence of bacteria and other unhealthy substances in the water can also go down. Another criteria that we could also do is through surveys. One of the things that we did in community Kibo in Kenya this past summer during our assessment trip was to go house to house and survey about 40 houses and asking them questions about their water usage. And one of the problems that we found was that the amount of time that community members spend traveling to their water source was very high and increased drastically during the dry season. So our goal is during the project and after the project to ask this survey question again in hopes of seeing the average amount of time spent collecting water decrease. So now I'm just going to give a quick summary and explanation of the typical project timeline and the phases that the project goes through. So just so you know, before and after each one of these phases, the chapter usually submits a report detailing what we intend to do, and then after we complete the project, what we did and our next plans. So the adoption phase was just explained previously by Daniella and I, which is the part of submitting an application, having the chapter read through the application, select a community, and start connecting with community members. For the assessment phase, there are a couple of things that happen. The assessment phase is the portion where we collect as much data as possible to be able to make very educated decisions about how the project should go, with a very, very, very heavy input from the community. So we have a couple of photos to show you. In this case, we have, again, in Cubone, the first CBO meeting. So usually in the assessment trip, we meet with the CBO, we talk with them, understand their needs, what they want, their vision, any advice and input they can give us. Of course, there's a large cultural difference, and a lot of the times, the community members know a lot more about how to handle their problems and the issues, the water-related issues that they face better than we do. So you want to take that advice and that information with as much openness as possible. This is a photo from the community meeting. So one of the things that's really important to do in the assessment trip and in further trips is to meet with the community, to introduce ourselves so that we're not strangers when we're walking around the community, to explain what the chapter is planning on doing, and of course to get as much input and advice from the community members themselves. We want to hear from them the issues, the water related issues that they've faced, and the ways that they see those issues being addressed. We also visited some health clinics to gather data about the number of water-related illnesses, the accessibility of resources, all of the medical resources that are available to the community, and at what cost those resources are available. We here also have a photo of a school, and this school is, I believe, a primary school classroom. And we visited some of the teachers, and we collected data from them also about the students. Now, this may seem a little bit tangential to the water-related problems, but it's really important when you're trying to address some sort of issue in a community with the help of the community to gain a very cohesive understanding of the community. So not just an isolated understanding of specifically what water related infrastructure is available, but to try to understand the community as a whole as much as possible, because without this holistic understanding, you can never really begin to appropriately address any of the issues they face, or to have real conversations with community members that allow you to understand the perspective that they're coming from a little bit better. So all of this data also can end up ultimately being useful because you can see the tangential impacts of water, for instance, on attendance in school. Another thing we did as well is we created a map of Kibon. Since there are no landmarks on Google Maps, we created a map that has a pinpoint at every single house, every single latrine, all the water sources that the community uses. This is important because when you're building a well, it has to be a certain distance from latrines and it has to be a certain distance from other wells. So this gives us a very cohesive understanding of the geographic situation of the community. Another thing too was that we collected water samples in a lot of the water sources that community members go to, and we looked at the bacteria levels so that we can again use this as a metric for measuring the progress and impact of the project. Finally, one of my favorite things was holding a women's only community meeting where we can understand the voices of the women. It can be very difficult sometimes, just due to cultural differences, to understand what women who are the main water collectors, the experiences they have. So since they are the main individuals collecting water, they're most likely also the most knowledgeable about how to address this issue, where the best borehole location would be, etc. And having a women's only meeting allows, I think, the space to be more comfortable for them to share their voices. And then this is the end with our in-country partner, Paul, driving us home. So that was the assessment phase. Before that, we wrote a report, and after that, we wrote a post-trip report where we discussed what we did in the trip. The next phase is the implementation phase, and that is basically where we implement the project. In that case, that is construction. So this is in Mukatani. This was the construction of a schoolhouse. So doing the actual construction. Here's another photo of the construction process. This is one of our lovely team members, Nicole, working on the project. You can also see from this photo that there's a lot of community involvement during the construction process. The point of the chapter and the community working together is that it's a partnership and we facilitate community ownership. So the involvement of community members is really appreciated and necessary to create this sense of community ownership of the project, especially for maintenance after the project is complete. Here's another photo showing the community involvement again. So this was the schoolhouse that Mukatani in Tanzania, the team was working on building, and you can see there's the type of work that ends up occurring on these projects. And then finally, there's monitoring and evaluation. So the monitoring and evaluation phase is mostly monitoring the progress of the project and the impact that it has made, and also making any repairs to design. I want to iterate that when you're going through each of these phases of the project, such as assessment, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, you can iterate through different phases multiple times depending on the information and the necessary steps of the project. For instance, if you do an assessment trip and you haven't collected enough information yet to be able to do an implementation trip, then you can do a second assessment trip to go back and gather any missing data. Or if to do the implementation of the project that will require multiple visits, you can do multiple implementation trips consecutively until the implementation of the project is complete before moving on to the monitoring and evaluation phase. Also, after completing the monitoring and evaluation phase, if you find that there is more to the project, then you can go back and do another assessment trip or another implementation trip, etc. Additionally, for all of these phases, throughout the assessment, throughout every implementation trip, throughout the monitoring evaluation, we're using the metrics, the monitoring metrics that we've discussed to keep tracking the impact of the project. So for the monitoring and evaluation phase, there are a couple things. First of all, it is recording the status of the infrastructure that we've built. So here we have a few photos of some of the infrastructure that was built in Tanzania, in Mukatani, and you can see that there are cracks. So our team members here are fixing the infrastructure, making any necessary repairs, monitoring. Sometimes, very often actually, for whatever infrastructure we build, we provide the communities with a manual of a maintenance and operation manual, so that they're able to maintain and operate the infrastructure after we leave. Again, here is a picture of the metrics that we're using. So they're collecting the sampling tests of the water to look at the quality, make sure that there's lower levels of bacteria. And of course, as you're doing the maintenance and if you're closing out the project, meeting with the community, discussing the project, discussing any further needs, any questions, any concerns, if there's further potential for other projects, other things that need to be done with in partnership with the community before leaving. The point is, over the course of the 5-year partnership, we can work on as many projects as necessary to help meet the basic human needs. Finally, there's closeout. This usually just involves a closure agreement, submitting for a program closure, and after this, the project is wrapped up. Oftentimes, we still keep in touch with the communities afterwards to make sure if they have any questions about maintenance or repairs, we can answer those, or just for the friendships that we've built along the way.
So now we're just going to talk about a little bit of what the Harvard chapter is doing. So as we are speaking, the Harvard chapter is currently working on 2 projects, one in Los Sanchez, Dominican Republic, and another one in Kibon, Kenya, that we use as an example throughout the this presentation. And we also have to mention that each project here has 2 project leads and 1 faculty advisor who is Chris and a professional mentor who is Nishit. So and those are the people along with the students, the people who are running the whole project. And we also want to say that every member plays a big role, and that the faculty advisor and professional mentors serve as very useful resources that we always go to when we want some advice, or if we want just more information about anything that we want and we're working on. But another source of information is the EWB resources, like the volunteer village, as we had mentioned before. It has all the information about all the projects that had been conducted before in the past, and is just immensely a great resource. So you might be wondering who's paying for all of this, where the Harvard chapter fundraise the money, because again, it's responsible of all the different costs, but as well as the 95% of the construction cost. People tend to donate as well as seize. Then you might also be wondering what you are expected as a member of this chapter. Well, first of all, I want to say that you don't have to be an engineer in order to join in the EWB Harvard Seas chapter, but because again, there is so much resource available from the faculty advisors, from the project leads, from the students themselves, that is there for you to feel like you are comfortable working on any project, and that the technicality of anything that we do here is not a barrier for you to feel involved and excited about any of the projects that we do. So as we are closing out this presentation, we want to give you some useful resources. So all of these are titles that are also clickable links. One of them, the first, is the EWB-USA Project Process Manual, that will give you all the different steps that any project implementation has. And there is also the Planning, Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning program. And as the title says, it gives more details on the planning step and the monitoring evaluation, as Marwa had mentioned before, and the learning program. And then there is also the volunteer village that I just talked about, which just has information on all the different projects that have been done before in the past. And we also have some conference presentations also available for you to watch if you want. Well, thank you very much.
Finally, we're going to briefly answer some frequently asked questions in case you're curious. I'm going to run through the questions right now really quickly before answering them, just so that you can skip to any question that you particularly had. So the questions are going to be, what are the CBO versus NGO versus in-country partner responsibilities? Why does EWB focus on water and sanitation projects? What is the difference between professional chapter trips and projects versus the university chapter project? When is the CBO usually formed? Does the community fill out the application or does the chapter fill it out? What is the effect of leaving parts of the application blank? And at what phase of the project are the chapter and community responsibilities laid out? So we'll start with the first one. What are the CBO versus NGO in-country responsibilities?
So the CBO represent the community and their requests. They are the main party in the chapter community partnership. They raise the 5% contribution fee and they communicate with the chapter constantly about the project. Also, they answer all the chapter's questions about the community and give advice. However, on the other side, the in-country partner is usually an NGO and they really bridge the cultural and language gap between the chapter and community. Since the NGO lives in the country and usually speaks English, they can really facilitate the communication about the project, and they can be asked to do some tasks while the chapter is in the US. For example, visit some sites to collect additional data, or calling borehole drillers to ask for quotes, yeah, etc. So the NGO usually knows about EWB in more detail, so they understand what we need and what we are asking for. In some cases, there is no NGO, like the case in Kibon, Kenya. So the in-country partners can be someone else. And in the case of our project in Kibon, again in Kenya, Paul is the one who is the in-country partner, and he's a Kenyan who has worked with EWB before.
Great, thank you, Daniela. Why does EWB focus on water and sanitation projects specifically?
So EWB US's goal is to help more countries meet basic human needs, and the biggest need usually not met relates to water and sanitation. It's very difficult to advance aspects like education when there is no water or sanitation. It has a huge impact.
And what is the difference between a professional chapter and the types of projects they do versus university chapters?
Professional chapters have the expertise that makes them more equipped to handle larger scale and more complex engineering projects. University chapters, for example, can do borehole projects, but a professional chapter might be able to do it.
And when is the CBO usually formed?
So if there is already like a committee or some sort of like representing organization that already exists in the community, they can identify themselves as a CBO in the EWB application. However, if there is not none, the community would form one before applying.
And does the community fill out the application or does the chapter fill it out?
So the community usually fills out the application with the help of an NGO, other in-country partner, or EWB chapters working nearby if there's one. But the chapter can help the community write their answers, but the answers are mostly from the community. If none of these aids exist, then the community may have to fill out the application by themselves, which can be very difficult.
So what is the effect of leaving parts of the application blank?
So it makes it difficult for the chapter to get a cohesive picture of the community, which may put their application to a slight disadvantage. However, in general, if there is a lot of information missing, EWB USA will reach out to the community before posting their application to try to fill the gaps.
And at what phase of the project are the chapter community responsibilities laid out?
Well, clear and effective communication between the chapter and the community is probably one of the most difficult parts of the partnership, particularly because of the challenges and the language barrier. However, usually the community has an idea of these responsibilities during their application process, and it is also discussed in much further detail during the first assessment trip. But of course, as always, more clarification and discussion of these responsibilities throughout the entire project.
Great. Thank you everyone so much for listening to the presentation. Feel free to reach out to any of the EWB Harvard chapter members if you have any questions or are interested in joining.
We really had fun making this presentation, and we hope that you are going to enjoy being part of EWB.